What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Prosey. I'm joined by Keone Tita, and today we're joined by a very special guest, Mike Pont. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Mike Pont. I'm 51 years old. I'm a carpenter, has-been athlete. Let's see. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm a father of two. My wife is a PhD researcher at Wake Forest. She studies gerontology. Lived in North Carolina now for a little bit over 4 years. We moved here from Colorado. I grew up in Colorado and New Hampshire. I was born in the Northeast. I was born in 1968, and my parents were both super young when they had me and when they had my brother and sister as well. I'm the oldest of three. And then when my mom divorced my biological father, she married a guy my dad had two of his own. So it's kind of like a little bit of a fucked up Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had my half sister Hillary. They had another child after they got married. But let's see. We moved to Colorado when I was 16, which was probably, at the time, at the age of 16, moving in the middle of high school was probably not the greatest thing for me. But I had always been pretty rebellious ever since my mom and my biological father divorced. I spent most of my childhood seeking the approval and the companionship of people outside of our house more than inside the house, and spent a lot of time with my friends, and that was from a very early age. We moved to Colorado when I was 16, and I went from basically kind of from a straight A student in New Hampshire to not really giving a shit in Colorado. Like I said, got very rebellious and started hanging out with kids that felt like the world had dealt them a shitty hand too. In New Hampshire, I dabbled in alcohol and drugs and stuff like that. But in Colorado, it seemed to be a good way to get to know people and to change the way that I felt,
Yeah. And do you think that, Mike, do you think that's when the as far as for your history with addiction, alcoholism, do you think that's when it all started in teenage years? Is that the beginning of it?
I think that there was definitely an alcoholic in waiting in me at all times. I think that if you know a whole lot about the disease of alcoholism, it's like there's a big hole inside of most alcoholics that originally and initially for me, it got filled with excelling at sports and excelling at, I was, like I said, I was a straight A student, and I really wanted to be smarter than everybody else in the room. It was never really like, I really love skiing, or I really love soccer, or I really love riding a bike. It was more like, they like me when I do this,
Right.
And I want them to like me, so I'm going to do this, and it wasn't really like, I want to learn as much as I can about math. It was more like, I'm better at math than you.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
And so when that couldn't get So that void, are you implying that when that void couldn't get filled, then it was like an easy transition into like, alcohol, which made you more able to hang out? I don't know, to quell your insecurities and be able to hang out with your friends and let yourself go a little bit. Is that?
Yeah. Look, I mean, when I moved to Colorado, like I didn't know anybody, and I moved from a town in New Hampshire that was the size of my graduating high school class.
Yeah. Okay.
It was like from, a tiny little town in New Hampshire to a suburban city out south of Denver. And, until I got to going to parties and meeting people and kind of that social lubricant that alcohol definitely is. I mean, I was sitting in the woods outside the school, having lunch by myself, hating life. And,
right.
And I think that, as soon as there was that inroad through the consumption of alcohol and maybe smoking some pot, and later on, taking some hallucinogenics and sort of, the social nature of, I mean, I don't think that I was drinking alcoholically right out of the gates.
Yeah.
But I definitely relied on that to, I would show up at a party and want to stand in the corner and get a couple beers in me and I can talk to anybody kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 And I can totally relate to that too. Thinking about my high school years and even some of my college years too. It just helps let yourself go.
Yeah.
And let go of the insecurities. So with you, with the addiction tendency, if you will, is there a family history before you?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah. My biological father died of alcoholism.
Okay.
And I never knew him. In fact, the only time I ever laid eyes on him as an adult was when he was already dead. He was laying in a mortuary in Florida. Mm. And I remember looking on his dead body and really just having a lot of hatred for him because it's kind of strange, this path of sobriety and recovery from alcoholism, because today I understand a little bit more about what killed him and really what was killing him from the get-go. I found a place in my heart to actually be pretty forgiving of him.
Right.
But yeah, my father died of alcoholism. My grandfather died of alcoholism. I'm pretty sure a couple aunts and uncles died of alcoholism. My cousin is either in rehab or just coming out of rehab and trying to get started in a 12-step program up in Massachusetts. But then my brother and sister, they can have a couple drinks and be like, "Oh, I'm starting to feel a little weird. This is enough," and
right.
I get a couple drinks and I'm like, all right, this is a good start,
Right.
So, I mean, certainly alcohol was present in my childhood, in the house. My parents did the best that they could, but there were, 6 kids at any given time in our house, and they were very young. I mean, My mom had me when she was 19.
Yeah.
And then was divorced by the time I was 4, and then remarried. And, I think that they did the best that they could with what they had. But, there was definitely alcohol in the house pretty much at all times when I was a kid. So,
right.
It wasn't like a strange thing for me to see people drinking,
Right. So it's almost like a normal thing then, alcohol in the house, no big deal.
Yeah. My 10-year-old, I think if he saw alcohol in our house right now, he'd be like, whoa, what's going on here? And
right.
When I was 10, it was like, oh, mom and dad are just having some wine,
Yeah. Right. So Mike, with that family history and with your history, what what led you on to recovery, and what got you there, and when did you know it was a problem?
Well, okay, so when I graduated from high school, my dad, the person I call my dad, who's not my biological father, but my stepdad, my dad took a job at a university in Denver, thinking that I would go to school there. And I was very rebellious. And I was like, screw you. I'm not going to your goddamn college. And
Right.
I ran away from home with my girlfriend. We ended up in New York City, and through a series of failures, ended up coming back to Colorado, going to college in Durango, and which is in the southwest corner of Colorado, and kind of picked up mountain sports. Really kind of attracted me. I became a professional rock climber when I was about 23 or something. I pursued rock climbing professionally for about 15 years, and got married. My first wife, I met her up in Canada when I was up there climbing. And all during that time, alcohol was just like, when I was climbing full time, alcohol was just something that we would have at the end of the day. It was I was dead broke,
Right.
So I couldn't exactly go have a night on the town or anything, but alcohol was just a way to wind down at the end of the day. I think almost kind of as normal as it got for me as a person. But then when my ex-wife and I lived up in Oregon, and when we had our son Jasper, she was like, look, this living out of a suitcase thing has got to end. We have a family now, we own a house, you got to get a job that's local. And I was kind of like, wait, hold on, what? Like, this isn't what I signed up for,
Right.
And so I kind of, I took a job trying to appease the household needs, and part of that entailed taking a job in a wood mill in Oregon, and I hated it. I hated being, from living on the road and kind of having this sort of quasi rock and roll lifestyle to getting up at 4:00 in the morning and working in a mill. So on the way home, and this is when our relationship really started to fall apart. On the way home, I would start, I started buying a 6-pack and drinking the whole thing on the way home, and buying a bag of marijuana and smoking a couple bong hits before I even got home. And when it really got to its worst, I would pull up at our house and see that my ex-wife was there, and I'd be like, God damn it. All right, well, maybe I'll, chuck another lap through the neighborhood, and,
Right.
And I think that was the first time that alcohol was really starting to be a negative player in my life. I relied on it to change the way I felt. And it wasn't just a social lubricant. It was to dull my angst and my frustration with the way that the world was kind of dealing me a shitty hand, and it wasn't that it was dealing me a shitty hand. That was just my perception,
Right. Right.
I think alcoholism is a disease of perception. I think addiction is a disease of perception, and we take drugs and alcohol because we don't like what we see in front of us, and we want to change that, or we want to turn it off.
Right.
And
so you call it a disease of perception. I think that's pretty powerful. But so then that leads me to think, okay, well, if you're perceiving something as awfully negative, then, is it as simple as, okay, just change your perception? And how did you go about doing that?
Well, so, when we got divorced, I think I think it's kind of normal to go through a divorce and to be like, all right, this is a fresh start. You know, I'm going to become a different man, you know?
Right.
And that was very much what I did. I instead of rock climbing full time, I took up carpentry and I took up like ultra distance running. That is one of the things that my ex-wife really was frustrated with me about all the time. You know, she's like, you know, maybe you could pick up golf. And the next thing you know, I'm golfing 7 days a week. Right. She's like, maybe you could pick up running. And I'm like, yeah, I'll go for a jog. And like 3 days later, I'm signing up for marathons, you know.
Right.
It was always, you know, this one goes to 11.
Right.
And so, you know, I pursued carpentry in very much the same way. You know, I wanted to be a master craftsman.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't just want to be a good carpenter. I wanted to be a better carpenter than you.
Right.
And I on a trip to Virginia from Colorado to do an endurance race called the Beast of the East, which is like an adventure race, multi-sport adventure race with a map and compass and shit. I met my current wife in Virginia, and she didn't drink and she didn't do drugs, and you know, she had, you know, I won't go too much into her history, but she had her reasons for not doing that. And I was like, oh, well, you're freaking awesome. So I'm going to stop doing drugs and stop drinking. Yeah, that sounds good. Let's have a relationship. And that lasted until I flew back to Colorado, you know. But over time she moved to Colorado, and we ran a lot. You know, I ran 50 milers and, you know, 50K trail races and stuff a lot, and rode, you know, like 24-hour solo mountain bike races and stuff like that. That was kind of my new driving passion. And not drinking with her was successful for, I don't know, maybe 7 months or something.
Mm-hmm.
And after a training run one day, I said, hey, you know, what would be kind of cool is if we went on this 25-mile trail run, and when we get home, maybe we'll have a couple beers in the fridge, you know, very innocent. Right. And she was like, okay, yeah, I think we could try that. And slowly but surely over the next probably 8 or 10 years, that became very much like, you know, more and more a central part of our lives. You know, craft beers were getting big in Colorado at the time. And I had a couple of friends that owned microbreweries, and it became kind of part of the cultural aspect of our lives, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was in denial for a long time about being an alcoholic, and sort of cataloged it under I'm a connoisseur of alcohol, of beer, you know.
Right.
Like I know everything there is to know about IPAs and, Belgian ales and whatever, you know. Mm-hmm. I had a refrigerator at our house in Colorado that was strictly for beer, you know, and I had cases of beer in the basement. I mean, you know, my biggest worry was always running out, and I had, you know, thousands of dollars of beer in my house at all times. It was, you know, so when my wife, you know, she got her PhD, like I said, at University of Colorado, and we bought a house, and we had our son, and so now we had 2 kids, and that was around 2008, and the economy was kind of in downward spiral, and the construction company that I was working for was kind of pulling up its tent stakes. And so I started my own company, little small, you know, carpentry company. And I went from being in the field with tool bags on to being behind a computer. And I'm not a businessman.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of time in the office at home, without anybody else around. And, I would get done with the books at around noon every day and be kind of like, maybe I'll crack a beer and put these proposals together. And cracking a beer turned into cracking 2 beers, turned into, I'm just going to drink while no one's looking and everything will be all right. And I think that's kind of when alcoholism kind of set its hooks in me. And that was about 2010, probably. And, my wife had her struggles too. And so there were 2 of us in the house with a lot of struggles, and we're trying to raise a teenager and a toddler at the same time. And she's trying to get her PhD and I'm trying to run a business. And it was just a really perfect recipe for unmanageability. Mm-hmm. I think it was probably 2012 or 13 when I was drinking to blackout pretty much all the time. At night, my sons would we had this chair and they would call that Daddy's pass out chair. And there were a couple episodes where I don't even remember what happened, but I woke up in the morning and my wife and son, young son, were locked in his bedroom because they were kind of concerned about what I was going to do. And I made all these, foxhole prayers and promises that I'm going to put it down. I'm going to stop drinking. I really, really am this time. And I'm going to take a couple nights and go to the hotel and give you guys some space, and I'm not going to drink. And, by the time I got to the hotel room that night, I'd have a 12-pack and a 5th of whiskey and a bag of weed every time, and it was dangerous. I mean, I was a hazard, I was driving our family around drunk,
Yeah.
Not stuff that I'm proud of, but it is the facts. Right. And, yeah, and it almost burned our relationship to the ground. When my wife got her PhD, she got a job at Wake Forest, and we moved here, and I kind of was like, well, this change is going to be great. I can put some time into me and put the bottle down, and I'm going to like get back into running, and I'm going to get back into biking, because I hadn't been doing that for a long time. I think I had gained about 60 pounds. So it's about 220 pounds. And I'm only 5'7", so pretty out of shape.
Right.
Certainly was when I ended up here. But, for me, not being here, not having, anybody that knew me here, and being completely new here was really just a terrible recipe for alcoholism to really take over my life. We went on a trip to Scotland that I don't even really remember. And when we got home, my wife, she'd had enough, and she went to find some recovery, and I wasn't having any of it. So I started, slinking around and saying that I was going to go for a hike, and I'd go to the trailhead with a case of beer and drink it and be wasted, and come home and be wasted. And it got to the point where, one morning, she woke me up on our bed and said, "Honey, I think you need to go talk to somebody and get some help." And I did, but I wasn't committed. So that was about 4 years ago, and it took about another almost 2 years to really actually get some traction and some recovery actually in my life. I've been sober for 2 years now. Yesterday was two years and a week.
Wow, congratulations.
So, yeah, thanks. I think for me, every other option, the I'm going to drink in the basement when nobody's looking, or I'm going to just drink in the restaurant when I'm by myself, or I'm going to swear off of it. And I don't know, for me, like I liken the way I was trying to get sober to putting a beer down in front of me and going, I'm not going to drink you. I'm not going to drink you. I'm not going to drink you. And then eventually I'd pick that drink up, and my recovery these days is to kind of turn away from alcohol and to focus my attention on and my spirit and my life on other things in life that I can be deeply immersed in, that aren't, staring down the drink, because I'll always drink if all I'm doing is trying to not drink.
Right. Yeah. It's like you're just going to keep thinking about it the more you try not to, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You
talked about, so what do you mean? This is interesting for me because this has come up. On your bullet point, you say, I'm seeking to grow spiritually, and I'm a self-proclaimed atheist, as I am also. Mm-hmm. And I feel like for some people that may be an issue, right? Because you kind of have this, some people would think, especially the religious among us, would say, well, you have this nihilistic view of the world, so to speak. What's the point of living if you're an atheist, so to speak? I hear this all the time from from religious people. So how do you surrender, and how does that surrender allow you to be kind of like a guiding force in this world, especially in regards to addiction?
Right. Well, so I'll tell you a little story about, so when we lived in Colorado, and my wife used to call me an evangelical atheist, because on Saturdays, back home, the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons would come around the neighborhoods and knock on your door and try to open you up to their religion or whatever, and I would be peeking out the blinds waiting for them to come up, because it was my chance to like argue with these people and to tell them how stupid they are and stuff, right? My old friend of mine and I even made up this flyer to really just berate these people and tell them how stupid they are. But what became clear to me is that I would close the door on these people thinking that I had won this argument, that, look at me, I won. And I would go back to burning my life to the ground.
Right.
And they would just go next door and see if they were willing to listen.
Right.
Today, my approach to a spiritual life isn't a religious life. I would say that for sure. It's, but I would also say that I'm much more okay with you or whoever, if that is what you want your spiritual life to look like. If you want your spiritual life to look like going to church and believing in a religious God and Jesus or whatever, as long as you believe in something and that fills you as a person, I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I never used to think that,
Right.
And when I say never, I mean like for, a good 40 years, I never thought that was like a real thing. I thought, God doesn't exist. I'm going to be a worm hotel when I die. This is stupid. There's no such thing as a soul or spirit or whatever. And, you know, kind of my first inroad to that was when I really hit bottom, and a couple friends, you know, reached out to me and continued to reach out to me on a daily basis for several weeks. You know, they'd call me, you know, every couple hours for a couple weeks just to make sure that I was kind of staying on path and not getting off into just myself. And that kind of, you know, a power greater than myself, you know. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it said like, or described as, you know, God could be like everything that's not me, you know, everything out here.
Right.
You know, it could be the connection that we have as people between people, you know. Mm-hmm. And for me as an alcoholic and an addict, my isolation in the last, you know, several years of my drinking, you know, all the stuff that I put between you and me was the thing, you know, that was what was keeping me sick. Right. And in sobriety, my understanding of spiritual growth is to try to remove all that stuff that's separating my connection to other people and to the spirit of the universe, I guess you could say, if that makes any sense.
It makes complete sense to me. I mean, I'm kind of coming from your position too. I mean, what I hear you saying is, you know, there's something bigger than myself out there, and that bigger than myself can be, you know, basically this podcast that we're doing. You know, you're helping, you know, the connection that us three have on this podcast, or the connection you have with people to help other people grow and be better and to just be better in the world. So I totally get that. You know, I also hear you saying, you know, it's about trying to create, you know, what's our impact on the world, like trying to create a positive legacy with what we've gone through. And I think that's important. But it's interesting because with Alcoholics Anonymous, right, isn't it about a belief in something bigger than yourself to help you through this?
Yeah. That's for sure. And, you know, I have to say, I hesitate to talk specifically about AA, and the reason for that, I mean, you know, I'm 2 years sober, but
right.
But there's nothing saying that tomorrow I won't go out and drink and go do this shit again. And I would never want anyone to. I wouldn't want to, you know, come off like I'm preaching about AA or about 12-step recovery, because right now it's working for me.
Right.
And I know that if I work it works for me. What I would never want to do is to claim some sort of like I'm cured. Right. Because, you know, if next week, next year, tomorrow, I was to go back and drink, then maybe the next person that seeks recovery, you know, hears this or sees me, you know, in a position of trying to promote, and then they see that I went out and got drunk, then maybe they're going to say, you know, that whole AA thing, that doesn't work, because look at Mike. He was preaching it one day and he got drunk the next.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, I get it. I get it. And I also get it from the religious aspect, right? It seems awfully hypocritical of somebody who's religious out there preaching, I don't know, anti-gay stuff, and then we find out later that they're homosexual, you know? So it seems hypocritical what that happens. However, I would say, you know, we're all human. So it's like, is part of the surrender, like forgiving yourself. Like I always feel like with addiction, you know, it's like, okay, you know, it's progress. If you're 2 years sober and then you go back to drinking, that's progress. Cause you didn't drink every day.
Right.
And then you go back to drinking, and maybe it's a step in the long term to, you know, get completely sober, but it's still progress. Or progress could be, well, I still drink, but I'm no longer drinking on the road. So it's like,
Right.
you know, I'm still blacking out, but I'm actually being somewhat safe about it than what I was. To me, that's progress as an addict, you know?
My experience with that is really more in respect to the progressive nature of the disease.
Yeah.
Like, I know that every time I put it down for an extended period of time, whether it was a week, a month, you know, this is as long as I've been sober, in 36 years. But every time it got worse, like immediately. You know, the progressive nature of it is really like, I don't think it would ever be the fun-loving days of having a couple beers after going on a bike ride and ever again. Like, that's just not. I mean, those days are gone for me. You know.
Right.
And any sort of rationalization that old friend was still there for me is a lie that I would be telling myself, you know?
Yeah, because not actually a friend to you.
No. And, you know, the way that I understand the disease of alcoholism, and probably addiction too, you know, I identify as an alcoholic because it's really what took me out. But I mean, you know, if you locked me in a room with a case of beer, a bottle of whiskey, a bag of weed, a bag of white powder, and a bottle of unknown pills with no way to get out, eventually I'm going to try all of it, you know?
Right.
I identify as an alcoholic because that's what really took me out. And, you know,
is that part of the process though, Mike?
Right.
Is that part of the process as far as identifying as an alcoholic? Do you think, you know, to help with recovery, you have to admit that you are abusing and using, that you do have a substance abuse problem or whatever that may be?
I mean, I think that that's really part of the surrender, in my experience, is to admit, you know, to my innermost self that I am completely powerless over alcohol. That anytime I put it in my body, you know, my body develops a phenomenon of craving, and next thing you know, I'm drinking to blackout. Like, within the last time. So the last time that this happened, I had been sober. I had been undrunk. I wouldn't call it sober because I wasn't really pursuing any sort of recovery. I was just, you know, and I was at the grocery store, and I was really kind of up in my head about, I was about to, the way I thought about it was that I was about to lose my truck. I wasn't about to lose my truck. The lease was just about to come up. But in my head, I had convinced myself that I was going to lose my truck, and that, you know, my self-worth was going down the tubes, and this was all going to blow up in my face, and I couldn't tell anybody, and what the hell is going to happen? And, you know, my mind's racing, right? And out of nowhere pops this thought, you know what, a beer would help this.
Right.
And I bought a bomber, like a big beer, and drank it in the parking lot, threw the bottle away, took the groceries home, you know, walking on pins and needles. Did anybody notice? Did anybody notice? Nobody noticed. And immediately I was like, this is the way I got to do it. You know, I'll just have a beer every day. I'll have one beer. I can handle this, you know? And that's how that disease worked in me. It was like, it got, you know, it got a little crack in the door, and it came right in, you know?
Right. And it came right in with like a feeling of being inadequate, being a little bit under stress. And it's kind of like quelling the anxiety of life.
And this will take that away. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one beer on a Tuesday turned into one beer on a Wednesday, turned into drinking around the clock by Saturday.
Right. Right.
And, that's exactly what I was doing. I was drinking a 6-pack on the way to work. They'd ask if, somebody had to go to the lumber yard. I'd raise my hand, say, I'll go. And I'd drink a 6-pack while I'm on my way to and from the lumber yard. And I'd drink a 6-pack on my way to pick my son up. I'd drink a 6-pack, when, when my wife's up at 5 o'clock in the morning doing yoga in the other room, I'll slink downstairs and drink as many beers as I can and then get back up into our bed and pretend like had been there the whole time. It was crazy. I mean, it was completely crazy.
Right.
And, when it all came crashing down, I was taking care of my son, who was 7 at the time. And my wife was out for the night. When she came home, I had drunk to blackout while I was taking care of my 7-year-old son.
Mm-hmm.
And the next morning, when I came out of our room, she said, "Honey, I love you. I really, really do. But you got to pack your things and go.
Yeah.
And you can't come back until you can be sober in this house. We've hurt our kids enough, and this has to stop."
Right.
And, the surrender part of it for me really was, I packed up a bag of clothes and I was in the basement getting ready to jump in the truck. And the thought occurred to me that maybe I should just kill myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because that'll show her.
Right.
And I'm a climber, so I know a little bit about knots, and I had some rope in the basement, and I fashioned a noose, and I'm standing in my basement with a bag of clothes in one hand and a noose in the other. And for whatever reason, I decided that I'm going to just jump in the truck and maybe I'll never come back. And so, all of a sudden, my biological father, who's a person that for my entire life I hated because of him being a drunk and leaving and never coming back. And all of a sudden, here I am in exactly the same place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of that day, luckily I didn't kill myself, by the grace of whatever spirit there is that we live in this world. I can't really explain.
Right.
I don't know why I'm here, but I am. And from that moment, life got different in some incredible ways, yeah.
So that it sounds like you hit rock bottom there. I think you hit rock bottom when you're thinking about killing yourself, and it sounds like you're just seconds away from doing that, but for whatever reason you didn't.
Yeah.
And
so then later that day, I'm on the side of the road, got a 6-pack that I'm going through, and I'm just sitting there, and it occurs to me that all I'm really doing is trying to figure out a way to get back into my house to keep this thing going the way it's been going.
Yeah.
And that I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change. I'm going to be the same person every time. And I don't really know where it came from, but I got out of the truck and I threw the rest of the 6-pack in the trash can that was kind of right next to my truck. And I haven't had a drink since. That was September 6th.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's been a lot of work. This has not been an easy year. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, you've had a lot of tragedy, and tell me about your son, because I know your son just recently passed away. Is that correct? And what's the story about that? And
so, he died January 22nd of a heroin overdose in Colorado.
Oh.
Jasper, he's an awesome person. He's an awesome spirit, and you know, he was troubled, and I think that I would be lying to myself to say that I'm not partially responsible for how he, the household that he grew up in. I was drunk,
right,
in the house, and but I was also, I don't know. I was a good dad, but I was also a drunk dad, and depending on the day, depending on the hour, depending on my mood or whatever, I was either the greatest dad in the world or I was a complete asshole.
Right.
Which I don't know. Maybe people that don't have problems with alcohol in their life, maybe they have days that they're complete assholes to their kids too. Maybe I'm being a little bit hard on myself. I really don't know, but
yeah, I think you are being hard on yourself with that. But I also think, especially with what you went through with your son, there's always going to be this sense of guilt, or I could have been better.
Yeah. And the truth is, I spoke to him pretty regularly. And there was a period where he had, about 10 months, in the way he described it, clean. But he was drinking and smoking pot, but he wasn't smoking meth and he wasn't shooting heroin. And so, he thought that was clean, and his mom was proud of him. And I was on the phone. I remember to this day, I was on the phone with her and I said, that's great. But in my experience, without some sort of program of recovery, he's going to find himself at without a defense against the first drug, and she said, what do you mean? And I said, it could be a nice day. It could be the shittiest day ever. He could be losing a job or getting the greatest job ever. He could be breaking up with his girlfriend or finding the love of his life. It could be just a day, but on that day, he's going to pick up and it's going to be worse. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I'd been sober long enough that I knew that there wasn't really anything I could do but to tell him that I love him and that I'm there for him and whenever he needs me.
Right.
October last year, I got to go and spend some time with him, and it was great. I talked with him about my struggles and my recovery, and that I'm 100% there for him anytime he needs me, and that I love him. That at the end of all of it, I love him.
Right.
For the next 3 months, we were talking fairly regularly, and he had just gotten a job doing carpentry and was really excited, and then I was at a little get together with some friends one night, and on January 22nd, and it's weird, like I was talking to this kid, this 24-year-old kid that he had just had a kid. And so when Jasper was born, I was working for ESPN at the time, working on the X Games down in San Diego, and I missed his birth. But the first time I laid eyes on my son, he was in the incubator at the hospital, and he had his hands kind of clasped behind his head, like he's sort of the king of the world kind of thing, right? And this picture that this guy showed me that night was a picture of his son with exactly that same, sort of repose, laying against a pillow on a couch. And I laughed, and I was like, man, that's exactly how my son looked the first time I ever saw him. And 30 minutes later, I found out that he was dead. But the kind of incredible thing is that I didn't want to drink. What could be described as the worst news ever, and for whatever reason, I had no desire to change how I felt. I talked to my brother that night, and after a lot of sadness and some discussion, he was quiet for a minute. He said, Mike, you're doing pretty good right now. He said, you don't have to go back to that dark place. Yeah. Which kind of informed me that he was right, and I am doing better. But it also informed me that that's exactly where I've conditioned people that care about me to think that I'm going to go in times like that, Right. And it was kind of at that moment that it occurred to me that I would be better off being right out here in the sunlight and going through this grief in a very open and honest and vulnerable way.
Right.
Which, has been kind of incredible, really. There's some stuff that I've been writing and sharing with people on my social media page and stuff that I get some responses. I mean, it helps me to just be honest about where I'm at, but it seems to have touched other people, which was never really mattered to me as much as it does these days, is to have an impact on another person and to have that connection with other people is something that losing my son has shown me the value of, if that.
Yeah, I totally get that. And in essence, what you're saying is I'm being honest with myself. I'm being completely humbled. I've been humbled by what I've been through. And through that, by being honest with myself and having the integrity to come out and say, look, I'm basically just human. I have my problems. Mm-hmm. You're opening up other people to do the same thing. And, one of the things that always frustrated me with getting back to the religious piece was, people basically, I always looked at religion as, okay, well, religion is one of these things that basically tells you, this is in my mind, I'm not saying this is true, but in my mind tells you you're a bad person if you can't be Christ-like, right?
Right.
But none of us can be that, mm-hmm. right? Whether you believe or not. And but we all in our culture kind of act like, we're better than really we are. We all have like lives that, we have our stressors, so to speak.
Yeah.
And most of the people out there, I call the with the flashy lives and everything, even them, it's almost like it's a sign like, look at me, I'm struggling because my life is so great. I mean, that's what I see. That's what I see now as a physician, because everybody that's come through my door as a physician and I get to know have serious struggles. And that was one of the reasons why I was like, at some point, and this helped me, at some point, I really want to be honest with not only myself, but what's wrong with just putting it out there? Because what I'm doing is that I'm opening a door for other people. And maybe that's the gift in it. Maybe that's the gift with what, your father had to go through, what you went through as a child. And, with your son's death, is like, it's completely humbled you and you've basically surrendered. Look, I'm just human. I'm trying to do the best that I can. And how can I make the world better by doing stuff like this or putting myself out there?
That night, after I got off the phone with my brother, the next person I called is a friend of mine that's also in recovery and also had lost a son. And he said, I'll be right there. And he was at my house in 5 minutes. And it really speaks to that sort of connection that spiritual connection that can come out of just being open and vulnerable, you know. It really just, it was jaw dropping, really, that another person would avail themselves in that way. It would really, you know, it was moving to experience that firsthand, you know. And all the way through this entire experience, it's been my observation and my experience that yeah, being open and honest about where I'm at every day, it helps me. But I think it also is something that another person that might be struggling, whatever they're struggling in life, can look at and say, well, shit, man, if he's putting one foot in front of the other, maybe I can too, you know?
Yeah.
You know, Jasper died on a Tuesday, and I go out to this, on Thursdays, I go out to this, and have for the past 2 years, out to this, addiction recovery place. It's like a closed, gated treatment center. And we have a get together every Thursday. And on that particular Thursday, I went out there because I wanted to help another person, you know,
right.
Which is different than it. I mean, for most of my life, it was like, I'm going to help you, but what's in it for me? You know?
Right. It's a selfish kind of help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
or I'm going to be better than you. I'm going to do it better than
wait till you see what I can do for you.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
And these days it's very much, everything's kind of been flipped in a lot of ways for me these days. I go out to that place because they help me, and they think I'm out there to help them. Yeah. So I can't remember what the other bullet points we had were, but
I think we pretty much hit on all of them. It just, I mean, what I hear from all this is, you know, basically what you went through is just, well, let me put it to you this way. What I hear from you, and it's kind of like my worldview also. It's like, I feel like we're here to help other people. And I feel like one of the best ways we can help other people is to let other people know what our struggles are, because a lot of them have the same struggles or worse or not. But again, it's a perception in your life. And if you can be honest with yourself, it's going to be much easier to be honest with other people, which in reality helps people.
Right.
As you can see on social media, like, you know, when you come out and say, yeah, look, I struggle with this. What's the reason to be ashamed? I'm just human. I'm just trying to do the best I can. And then I also go to the place, like, as an agnostic or as an atheist, like, what is the point of being here? Well, the point of being here is to create legacy, a positive legacy for people. So if I can use my life or use what I learned from my son's death or from the experience I've had in life to help other people, to help them not do that split-second chance and kill themselves, because you know it's going to get better in a month or so, you know, as long as you can think clearly, you know it, you know, so what? You drank again. But again, it's just it's a struggle of life. You do better next time. It's like success. You've heard the saying, right? Success only comes about from numerous failures.
Right.
Failure comes about when you give up.
Yeah. There's, yeah, I think that we as people often dupe ourselves into thinking that my troubles are way worse or way different than your troubles. You know, and it's funny, after my son's death, I started diving deeply into trying to seek and search for spiritual writings and stuff. And I found some really cool, like some Buddhist parables and things that really informed me. You know, there's this one, it's called, I think it's called the story of the mustard seed. And it's about this woman who loses her son, And she wants her son to be brought back to life. And everybody in the village tells her to go see the Buddha. And she goes up and he says, yeah, I think I can help you. Go find some mustard seeds from the village, but you got to only take mustard seeds from the houses that have not suffered death. And so she goes down, she's knocking on all the doors and she's asking people for mustard seeds, and they say they have mustard seeds, but they also have suffered death. And while she's not gathering mustard seeds, she begins to understand that everyone suffers.
Right.
That everyone has had loss.
Right.
And the way my takeaway from that was that, you know, if I sit just here and isolate myself and think, well, you don't know what it's like to be me, because like I've had this loss.
Right.
That's really selling the human race a little bit short, right? Like I can learn from you and you can learn from me, and we can share this journey together. Or I can be over here by myself and think all these things in my head and not really have the connection that moving forward in life I need, you know. Right. I need connection. I have a deep need to grow in a spiritual way by being part of this flow of life, you know, this the stream of life. And I started to really kind of become aware of some of that, those needs for myself, only through this loss, you know, which I have a friend he likes to say that we like to think we know what just happened. Right. But really we only know how we feel about it. Right. Because I don't know, you know, in 5 years, what's going to come out of everything that's happened since my son died. I don't know what's going to happen, you know, but I know that I want to be present for it, you know, because, you know, I can look at it all as bad. I can look at it all as this terrible tragedy. I can look at it all as poor me, or, you know, poor my son, or goddamn drugs or whatever. But I don't know that life really has that in store for me anymore. Right.
Well, and it's also about, you know, you're able to sit, like your brother pointed out to you. Now, when the pain comes or whatever tragedy comes, you can sit there and deal with it in a way that's not gonna, you know, destroy you. You know, you're able to sit there and deal with the pain instead of masking it with whatever drug of choice that you have.
Yeah.
You know,
it really seems like it circles around just ownership of those emotions.
Yeah. And ownership of, and not trying to, you know, justify or rationalize, you know, covering them up or defend some crazy point of view that isn't real. You know, or, you know, I think I've come to understand, what, you know, if I'm wrong, it's usually pretty obvious if I'm wrong these days. And part of that is that I'm suddenly find myself trying to justify or rationalize or explain or defend, an opinion or a point of view or an action. If I'm doing what's right, I don't really need to do any of those things, you know?
Right. Yeah. You don't need to hide anything, cover anything up or anything like that.
Yeah.
It makes your life less stressful too.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
I think probably 3 years ago, if you guys had asked me to come on this show, I would have spent all last night worrying about it. You know, I was making coffee at my house before I came over here, and my wife's like, "So, are you nervous?" And I said, "No." Should I be? I'm just gonna go talk.
Yeah, people get pretty afraid of Brian over there. No, I was actually I'm thrilled to talk to you about this, because especially, you know, you're a person I've never experienced this. I've never gotten so low where I've started thinking about suicide or anything like that. And the tragedy of thinking about taking one's life. You're only a split second away from doing it, you know, by whatever means that you have. And if you can stop and be mindful of that, you know, based on what you told us today, you know, there's no telling how many lives you saved or we saved by having this podcast. So I'm thrilled and honored that you came on, and I hope to have you on soon, Mike, or again, especially if you know, if you're willing. But
yeah, I'd love to. It's good talking to you guys, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Is there anything else that you or Brian think we should just hit on for the listeners before we get off?
I was just curious,
Brian's
Mike.
got to get his word in here somewhere.
I'm always taking over this thing, Brian.
I was looking up at his image trying to make sure he wasn't asleep. I was like,
Mike, I'm curious if you're okay with people reaching out to you on Facebook, because it seems like you've kind of cultivated your own kind of just group of accountability there. And it is interesting. And I know obviously we talked about this at length, but and I'm similar to Keone, just in the atheist type views. And it's just unique in this. So I was wondering if it's okay if people reach out to you on Facebook or wherever you're at.
Yeah, sure.
We can put that in the show notes.
Yeah. So is that, do you have a web page or anything? Is it mostly Facebook that you?
Yeah, this is about as technical as I ever get. Is like,
okay.
Evans had to set this up for me. I'm like, I don't know how to do this shit, man. He's like, come on over to my house. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty good with a hammer and nail.
I maybe contact you about that, actually, because I'm certainly not. Yeah, fascinating story. Thank you for being on. You know, it sounds like your journey so far in life has helped you become more compassionate with yourself, or definitely with others, right? Sure, as the religious people walk up to your front door, you're not going to be like, I'm going to win. It's more like, you know, it's a struggle. Everybody has their path in life, you know.
It is kind of fascinating to, you know, like I had heard that, you know, to get sober and to have a sober life, you know, that a sort of a spiritual connection was, you know, essential. And you know, for about 2 years, I was like, well, you know, but I've been an atheist most of my life. Like it would suck. I can't be a hypocrite, you know. It's like, dude, I've been a fucking hypocrite most of my life. You know?
But that's on the road to recovery, right? I think it's about admitting, you know, where we are all hypocritical in our lives.
You know, my understanding of recovery as it's happened in my life is it's not so much like it's like a process of subtraction more than like piling on more knowledge or more opinions or more of this and more of that. It's more like getting down to what's underneath all of that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, anyway, Mike, thank you so much for being on. Brian and I are honored. My condolences about your son and
thank you.
You know, what happened this past year.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for using that as a gift for all of us and our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for being so willing to share your story. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care.
See ya.